If you could just comment on your experience with Western governors and how that has manifest there.
Yeah, one thing certainly has frustrated me as I came into higher education from industry is I'm surprised by the focus on funding an ever-increasing cost as the means to improving affordability. When in reality, what you need to focus on first is what is the actual cost of acquiring the credential I'm supposed to acquire in the first place. And so there's not enough attention given to the actual cost of delivery, how much is actually focused on the learning rather than many other things, and so what should be funded. And when you also consider things like we mentioned, the working learner and the shorter cycle programs and work-based learning, like many of those can be consumed at a much lower cost than most federal programs are designed to support. So we actually really love things like the Federal Work Study program, where it can be a pathway to funding, for example, paid internships or apprenticeships across the small business sector that allows employers to participate in providing work-based learning options available to students that previously didn't have aid options to be available. Having said that, what you do still, I think we absolutely as an industry, higher ed as an industry, have not done enough is focusing on the cost of the product itself. And it can't continue to cost what it does. I think the college scorecard could start to highlight some of those things, especially done at a program level where it will be pretty evident that having a single price for every program the institution offers is no longer tenable. You have to align the cost to deliver with the opportunity as well. So we as a teacher college, for example, like we know it costs more to deliver because of the demonstration teaching that you have to manage, the field placement, because of the pretty high licensure requirements in a program like that. But when the earnings potential is only $50,000 to $80,000, depending in your career, you can't charge someone $80,000 to acquire that. The ROI is not really good. You have to be able to keep it really low cost. So I think having more transparency and better data about this will help individuals start to evaluate the ROI in their consumption, and that will force institutions of higher ed to change their practices for sure.
Exactly, and I think about another example of that. I visited Georgia Tech last year sometime, and they had implemented an online computer science degree program, and they were able to offer that, I think, at about a quarter of the cost of an on-campus program. Yeah. And they were surprised by the uptake in students, and I said, well, what's there to be surprised about? I mean, this makes sense, and they've had just a run on students wanting to participate in that online program, and their on-campus program as a result has diminished.
Yeah. I think that's a great example. University of Illinois is another great one where in their MBA programs, they basically scuttled the on-campus presence-based one for an online-only MBA. I think they reduced the cost of it by 2/3, so now it's something like $24,000 a year versus the $80,000 a year it was before. Enrollment actually went up dramatically, because it became much more accessible. The curriculum and the quality of it stayed the same, basically. There are a lot of things that are driving that. Recognizing that we've covered a lot of ground, and we're also kind of at time, so I want to be respectful of that. But a couple just highlights as I ask you your last question. One, we talked about things like new currencies. We talked about different pathways that can be work-based, that can be shorter cycle programs. New currencies being things like micro-credentials, certificates. We talked about affordability. We've talked about the K-12 to work, the K-12 to education. We've talked about a lot of different things. So maybe just in your final comments you could share with those in the audience here is, this obviously isn't just one sector of participants that has to innovate. It has to include institutions of higher ed, it has to include employers, it has to include policymakers, et cetera. For some of the employers in the room, what would be maybe your parting comments as to how they can help influence or accelerate the much needed innovation in education so that they can participate in really advancing the skills and capability of the workforce they need for the future?
Well, sure. There's a couple of things I would suggest. First of all, your support for the Education Freedom Scholarship Initiative would be very helpful and valuable. I didn't get a chance to explain this in great detail, but very simply, it would empower students in the K-12 age range, empower their families with scholarships to find the right fit for their education. States would decide whether or not they wanted to participate in this federal tax credit pool, and individuals would voluntarily contribute to it. So all very voluntary, nothing mandatory here, but every opportunity to provide a lot more freedom and flexibility to families that need to find a different place or fit for their child or their children as they're going through and navigating through their K-12 years. Much more freedom in education K-12 will result in a lot more innovation. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. The more consumers you have that are demanding something different, the more likely it is we're going to see a lot more creativity and innovation at the K-12 level. And then the second thing I would say is employers, I encourage you to get together with the educators in your area and figure out how you can partner to meet the needs of students today and for your workforce today and tomorrow. We have had way too big a walls between education and business and industry, and those walls have got to come down. And so I really encourage you to reach out to educators and see how you can partner with them to really meet your students in your community's needs and ultimately your own workforce needs.
Madam Secretary, thank you for your time today, but more importantly, thank you for your commitment to innovation and also being very forward-looking in that regard and accepting the fact that we may get some things wrong, but the reality is that that you're committed to a future that increases the connection between education and opportunity. And I think all of us can appreciate that commitment because it will advance much needed change, both that can be facilitated in industry and across the sector, but also that can also facilitate change in policy and other models that will really enable this education highway, as you called it, to become a true reality for many of the adults who need it desperately. So please join me in thanking Secretary Betsy DeVos for joining us today. Thank you so much.